She never left the attic. Those words were never written anywhere, yet they lingered in the quiet air of the old house, as if the beams themselves had learned to whisper them after dark. Tonight, as the world outside softens and the hour grows late, allow those words to drift gently into your awareness, not as a warning, but as an invitation into a calm and shadowed story meant to guide you slowly toward sleep. I am Evelyn Blackwood, and you are listening to Midnight Murmurs Radio, where forgotten histories breathe softly, and even the quietest mysteries are allowed to rest. Before we continue, let your body settle. Find a comfortable position, letting the weight of the day sink gently into the surface beneath you. Breathe in slowly through your nose, counting to 4, and then release that breath through your mouth just as slowly. With each exhale, imagine the noise of the waking world drifting farther away. Your shoulders loosen, your jaw softens, your thoughts begin to slow, like dust settling in a beam of lamplight. There is nowhere else you need to be now. This story will hold you safely. Picture a small American town in the northeastern hills, where autumn arrives early and lingers long. The year is difficult to place, because the town itself seems to exist slightly outside of time. Maples line the narrow streets, their leaves turning amber and rust, carpeting the sidewalks in a quiet, papery hush. Porch lights glow softly behind lace curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marks the hour, its sound low and patient, echoing through the cool evening air. At the edge of town stands a house that most people avoid without quite knowing why. It is not ruined nor abandoned, but it carries the subtle stillness of something long forgotten. Built in the late 19th century, its tall, narrow frame rises 3 stories high, crowned by a steep roof and a single attic window that faces the woods. During the day, the glass reflects nothing but sky and branches. At night, it appears darker than the darkness around it, as though light itself hesitates before touching it. Locals speak of the house in lowered voices, often changing the subject afterward, embarrassed by their own unease. They say the attic was once used for storage, then for sewing, then for nothing at all. They say no one has gone up there in decades, and sometimes, usually during the long weeks leading up to Halloween, someone will admit that they hear soft movements above the ceiling after midnight. Not footsteps exactly, but the gentle shifting of someone who never quite settles. Long ago, the house belonged to the Hawthorne family, a name that once carried quiet respect in the town. They were keepers of records, preservers of letters, calendars, and church registries, the small details that form the spine of local history. Their youngest daughter, Eleanor, was said to be delicate, thoughtful, and unusually quiet, even as a child. She preferred the upper floors of the house, where the air was warmer and the sounds of the world came softened through layers of wood and plaster. As the years passed, Eleanor retreated further upward, spending her days beneath the slanted ceilings of the attic, surrounded by trunks of old clothing, brittle newspapers, and unfinished quilts. No one thought it strange at first. Intose de solitude was not yet considered a symptom, but after a winter, when illness swept through the region, something changed. Eleanor was no longer seen at all. Visitors were told she was resting. Letters went unanswered, and the attic door, on the left, was quietly closed. History records very little of what happened next. A brief notice in the local paper, a funeral held without a procession. The house remained standing, occupied, then empty, then occupied again, yet no one ever claimed the attic as their own. Some said it felt colder than the rest of the house. Others said it smelled faintly of lavender and dust, as though someone had just passed through. Tonight, as you drift deeper into comfort, imagine standing at the base of the narrow staircase that leads upward. The wood beneath your feet is smooth, worn by generations of careful steps. The air is still, calm, not threatening. There is no urgency here, only the quiet sense that the past has not finished breathing. The attic waits above, patient and unchanged, holding a story that has never truly left. The staircase creaks softly beneath each imagined step, not in protest, but in recognition, as though it remembers every careful footfall from long ago. The banister is smooth and cool beneath your hand, polished by time rather than care. As you continue upward in your mind, notice how the sounds of the house below begin to thin and fade. The ticking clock grows distant. The outside world, with all its unfinished concerns, loosens its grip and slips quietly away. Halfway to the attic, the air changes. It becomes warmer, faintly scented with old wood and something gentler beneath it. Lavender, perhaps, dried long ago but never entirely gone. This is the smell of stored summers, of pressed dresses and folded letters, of a life paused rather than ended. Your breathing remains slow and even, your body heavy and safe, while the story moves gently forward for you. At the top of the stairs, there is a narrow landing and a small door set into the slanted wall. The attic door is plain, painted the same pale color as the hallway, yet it feels older than everything around it. Its handle has been touched by many hands, though none recently. There is no lock. There never was. People later said there had been no need. When Eleanor Hawthorne first began spending time here, the attic was not a place of fear. Sunlight poured through the single window in the late afternoons, warming the floorboards and illuminating floating motes of dust that danced slowly in the air. She brought her books here, her sketch pads, her sewing basket. The attic was where she listened to the distant sounds of the town and imagined stories unfolding just beyond her reach. But as the years grew heavier, the attic became something else. Letters stopped arriving, voices below soft, then disappeared. Winter pressed its cold hands against the house, and the attic, once bright, fell into shadow. Eleanor remained quiet and unseen, as though the space itself had learned how to keep her secrets. Those who lived in the house afterwards spoke of small, strange details. A rocking chair that faced the wall, though no one remembered moving it. A folded shawl left neatly on a trunk, and sometimes latte nighties sound like slow breathing, not close enough to frighten, not distant enough to ignore. The house never felt hostile. It felt occupied, as you imagine. Standing before the attic door now, notice how calm the moment feels. There is no sudden noise, no sharp movement, only stillness, deep and patient, the kind of stillness found in libraries after closing time, or churches after everyone has gone home. This is not the silence of emptiness, but of waiting. Beyond the door, the attic rests, much as it always has. The ceiling slopes inward, wrapping the space in a protective hush. Wooden beams stretch overhead like the ribs of a great, sleeping creature. Trunks line the walls, their brass handles dulled with age. A single chair sits near the window, angled just enough to catch the last light of day. And beneath it all, the floorboards carry the memory of soft footsteps, pacing slowly, thoughtfully, back and forth. History would later call Eleanor reclusive, unwell, fragile. But history is often written from a distance, without listening closely enough. What it failed to record was how deeply she listened to the house itself, how she learned its rhythms, its sighs, the way it settled at night. She understood its loneliness, and perhaps it understood hers. There are moments, especially during the quiet weeks of autumn, when the attic seems to stir again. Not with fear, but with familiarity, a sense that something unfinished still breathes softly among the shadows. On Columbus Day, when the town celebrates its origins and speaks proudly of beginnings, the house remains quiet, as though remembering another side of history, one that was never meant to be forgotten. As you continue to drift deeper into rest, imagine the attic light dimming, the edges of the room softening. Nothing here demands your attention. Nothing rushes you forward. The presence that lingers is gentle, observant, and like a thought that returns just before sleep and then fades again. Let your breathing slow further now. Your body grows heavier, more relaxed, as the story wraps around you like a warm blanket. The attic door remains closed, not to keep you out, but to preserve the calm within. And as this part of the story begins to fade, allow yourself to drift even deeper into comfort, knowing that what waits above is patient and will still be there when the night continues. Night settles over the town like a soft, familiar quilt stitched together from shadows and memory. Outside, the wind moves slowly through bare branches, producing a gentle, rhythmic sigh that seems to lull the world into rest. Inside the old house, the walls absorb the darkness, holding it quietly, as though they have learned over many years how to keep the night calm. As you remain comfortably at rest, imagine the house during these late hours, when every sound becomes more noticeable, yet somehow less alarming. A clock ticks somewhere below, steady and unhurried. Pipes shift softly in the walls, not with complaint, but with the natural movement of age. And above it all, in the attic, there is a presence that has grown accustomed to the dark. The first unmistakable sign came not as a scream, nor as a sudden shock, but as something so gentle it was almost missed. One autumn evening, many years after the Hawthorne family had gone, a young woman renting the house awoke just after midnight. She could not say what stirred her, only that the silence felt different, thicker, as though the house itself were listening. She lay still, her breathing slow. The room bathed in moonlight when she heard it, a sound above the ceiling, faint and measured, not footsteps, but the careful movement of fabric brushing against wood, the soft shift of someone adjusting their weight after standing too long. It lasted only a moment, then stopped, leaving behind a sense of quiet awareness rather than fear. Over the following nights, the sounds returned, always subtle, always brief. A gentle tap, like a knuckle resting against a trunk, the faint creak of the rocking chair near the attic window, moving just enough to acknowledge the passing of time. No one ever saw anything. No doors opened. No lights flickered. Yet the presence felt undeniably attentive, as though someone above was following the rhythm of the house and those within it. Records from the town archive mention other tenants who noticed similar things. A school teacher who heard humming late at night, low and wordless, drifting down through the beams. A widower who found old quilts unfolded and refolded in new patterns by morning. Each story shared the same tone of confusion rather than terror. No one reported feeling threatened. Instead, they described a sensation of being quietly accompanied. Eleanor Hawthorne had loved to hum while she worked. This was mentioned once, briefly, in a letter preserved between the pages of an old ledger. A family friend wrote that Eleanor's humming was so soft it seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was a detail easily overlooked, yet it lingered, waiting to be remembered. As the nights deepened and the leaves fell away from the trees, the attic grew more active, though never louder. On Halloween, when children passed the house with flickering lanterns and playful shivers, the attic window glowed faintly, reflecting candlelight that was not there. Some claimed to see a figure seated by the glass, motionless, watching the slow procession below with quiet interest. From within, the attic remained unchanged. The trunks stayed closed. The chair remained angled toward the window. Dust lay undisturbed except for the faintest trails, as though brushed by the hem of a long dress. Time seemed to pass differently here, folding in on itself, looping gently, refusing to move on completely. As you imagine this space now, notice how calm it feels. The presence does not intrude. It observes. It remembers. It listens. This is not a story of sudden terror, but of something that stayed because it had nowhere else to rest. Eleanor had learned the house too well to ever truly leave it behind. Let your breathing remain slow and steady. Each inhale draws in comfort. Each exhale releases the weight of the day. The story continues without urgency, allowing you to drift alongside it, safe and untroubled. And as this part of the night softens, allow the images to blur slightly at the edges, like lamplights through a thin curtain. The attic grows quiet once more, holding its secrets gently. As the night deepens, the house begins to remember. Old homes often do. They collect moments the way floorboards collect footsteps, pressing them gently into their grain until they can no longer be separated from the wood itself. This house, standing patiently at the edge of town, has learned how to hold memory without breaking beneath its weight. Imagine the hour just before dawn, when sleep becomes deepest and the world feels suspended between breaths. The air inside the house is cool and still. Moonlight slips through narrow windows, tracing pale paths across the walls. And within the attic, something stirs, not to announce itself, but simply because the house has begun to dream. Eleanor Hawthorne did not disappear in the way stories often suggest. There was no dramatic vanishing, no locked room, no sudden cry for help. Instead, she faded slowly from view, her world narrowing until the attic became both refuge and horizon. In those years, society had little patience for quiet suffering. Those who withdrew were often left alone, assumed to be fragile, or worse, inconvenient. The house absorbed her days. It learned the sound of her breathing as she slept beneath slanted beams. It learned the pattern of her pacing during long afternoons, the way she paused by the window when church bells rang below. Each small habit was folded gently into the structure, becoming part of its internal rhythm. Long after Eleanor's physical presence ceased, those rhythms remained. The house continued to settle at night in the same familiar places. The attic floorboards sighed in the same measured sequence. When the wind pressed against the eaves, it did so as it always had, eliciting a soft response from within, like a remembered conversation carried on without words. Those who later lived in the house often described a strange sense of being watched over rather than watched. Doors closed quietly on their own. Blankets slipped back into place during cold nights. One child, waking from a fevered dream, spoke calmly of a woman who sat beside her until morning, humming without moving her lips. There was a time, recorded faintly in a forgotten town ledger, when a doctor was called to the house. He climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, noting the stillness, the dust, the neatly arranged belongings. His notes described the room as peaceful, almost too peaceful, as though the world outside had stopped mattering there. The ledger ended abruptly after that entry. No conclusion was offered, no follow-up recorded. On certain nights, particularly during the long stretch between Columbus Day and Halloween, the attic seems to grow warmer, as though recalling the presence it once sheltered. The window fogs faintly from the inside. The rocking chair shifts just enough to acknowledge the passing hours. These are not warnings. They are reminders. As you continue to rest, allow the images to soften. There is no need to resolve every mystery. Some stories exist not to be solved, but to be held gently, the way one holds a memory that is both sad and comforting. Eleanor's choice to remain, whether by circumstance or by will, left an imprint that time itself learned to respect. Your body grows heavier now, your breathing deeper. The house grows quiet again, settling back into stillness. The attic waits, unchanged, its presence calm and patient, as it has always been. And as this part of the story drifts toward rest, let your thoughts slow, your awareness narrowing to the simple rhythm of breath and quiet. The past is not pressing in. It is resting beside you, calm and unthreatening. There comes a moment in every old house when someone listens, not with curiosity, but with patience, not to uncover a secret, but to understand it. That moment arrived quietly, as most meaningful moments do during a long, slow autumn when the days shortened and the nights seemed to breathe more deeply. The woman who listened was not searching for ghosts. She was a historian by trade, drawn to the town by its overlooked archives and fading records. The house offered affordable rent and a silence she welcomed from her first evening there. She sensed the stillness above the ceiling, not as an absence, but as a presence that shared the space without demanding it. Each night, She slept with her window open slightly, allowing the cool air to move through the rooms. And each night, just before sleep took her, she noticed the same gentle pattern. The house would settle, the attic would respond. A pause. Then calm. It was as though two breaths were sinking, one human, one something older. Instead of fear, she felt companionship. When she worked late, surrounded by notes about early settlers, forgotten women, and unrecorded lives, the attic seemed to grow attentive. Papers stayed where she left them. Lamps burned steadily without flicker. In the quiet hours, she sometimes felt a presence behind her, not close enough to startle, but near enough to feel supportive, watchful. In the archives, she discovered fragments of Eleanor Hawthorne's life scattered among birth records and property deeds. There were no medical reports, no detailed accounts of her final years, only mentions. A name crossed out and not reading remains upstairs. The phrase appeared twice, in different hands, years apart. One evening, driven by something she could not name, the historian climbed the stairs and stood before the attic door. She did not open it. Instead, she sat on the landing, her back against the wall, breathing slowly. She spoke aloud, not to summon anything, but to acknowledge it. She spoke of Eleanor's name, of how history had passed her by, of how silence can sometimes be mistaken for absence. The air shifted gently, warming by a degree almost too subtle to notice. From behind the door came a sound like a long, careful exhale. Not sorrowful, relieved. That night, the historian dreamed of the attic as it once was, filled with afternoon light. Eleanor sat by the window, sewing carefully, humming a tune without words. She did not look up, yet her presence filled the space with calm. There was no request made, no message delivered, only recognition. From that night on, the house felt lighter. The sounds above became less frequent, though never entirely gone. The historian understood that Eleanor was not bound by unfinished business in the way stories often claim. She remained because she had been left behind, folded into the structure of the house itself. Her life preserved in wood and shadow. As you rest now, allow that understanding to settle gently within you. Some spirits do not linger in pain or anger, but in familiarity. They stay because they belong somewhere, and leaving would mean being forgotten all over again. Your breathing is slow, deep, steady. The story continues to cradle you, asking nothing, offering only quiet companionship. The town did not change all at once. Small places rarely do. Instead, acceptance arrived the way dawn does, gradually, without announcement. The house remained at the edge of town, its windows glowing softly at night, its attic dark but no longer avoided. People still crossed the street when passing it, though now with a kind of respectful quiet rather than fear. The historian stayed through the winter. Snow gathered on the roof, settling thick and heavy, insulating the attic in a deep, hushed stillness. On nights when the wind howled through the trees, the house held firm, creaking gently, as if reassuring itself. The attic responded in kind, the familiar soft settling returning, steady and calm. She continued her work in the archives, slowly piecing together stories like lived quietly and remembered poorly. And when she returned home each evening, she paused at the base of the attic stairs, not to climb them, but to acknowledge the space above. Sometimes she spoke softly. Sometimes she simply breathed. The response was always the same, a sense of balance restored. Word spread, not through gossip, but through absence. Fewer people reported strange experiences. Children no longer dared each other to ring the doorbell on Halloween. On Columbus Day, when the town gathered to retell its founding myths, someone always lit an extra candle in the church, though no one ever said why. The attic window remained dark, yet those who looked closely claimed it reflected more than the sky. It held memory. It held present. Eleanor Hawthorne had not vanished into legend or terror. She had become part of the house's quiet guardianship, a witness rather than a warning. As you rest now, feel the story easing its grip, loosening gently, allowing you to drift. The house stands calm. The attic rests. The past breathes softly and then grows still. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Let your thoughts slow to the pace of old floorboards settling after midnight. There is nothing left to uncover tonight, only rest. And as this chapter closes, remember that some stories are not meant to frighten, but to soothe, reminding us that even the unseen can be gentle, and even the forgotten can remain at peace. If you've found comfort in this quiet mystery, consider subscribing to Midnight Murmurs Radio, where.com. Haunting bedtime stories continue night after night. Your support allows these gentle histories to keep breathing softly in the dark. The second chapter begins without announcement, the way deeper sleep does, slipping in quietly while the mind loosens its hold on edges and names. The house remains where it has always been, steady beneath the slow passage of seasons. Yet something within it has shifted, not disturbed, but attentive, as though a long-held breath has finally been released. Beyond the town, winter gives way to early spring. Snow recedes from the roof in thin, glistening lines, dripping softly into the thawing earth below. The attic, grabbed for months in cold silence, warms again. Wood expands. Beams settle into new positions with low, patient murmurs. These sounds are not new, but they are noticed differently now, heard as part of a larger rhythm rather than isolated moments of unease. Eleanor Hawthorne is no longer only a presence. She has become a current, moving gently through the house's memory, touching certain hours more than others. Dawn belongs to her most of all, in that pale interval between night and morning, when the world feels unfinished. The attic seems almost luminous, as though remembering the way sunlight once pooled on its floor. Those who pass the house in early morning sometimes pause without knowing why. They feel a softness in the air, a calm that does not belong to the weather. Birds gather on the roofline longer than expected. The wind moves around the house rather than through it, as if mindful of what rests inside. The historian, preparing to leave at the end of her lease, spends her final weeks listening more than writing. She wakes before sunrise and sits quietly at the small desk beneath the attic stairs. In these moments, she senses a clarity she has not known elsewhere. Thoughts arrange themselves without effort. Memories surfaced gently, without pain. She understands now that Eleanor's presence is not bound to sorrow, but to continuity. The attic was never a prison. It was a threshold, a place where the noise of the world softened enough to be bearable. In an era that offered little space for those who moved slowly or felt deeply, Eleanor found her own stillness and remained there. Long ago, American houses like this one were meant to be self-contained worlds. Women worked unseen in upper rooms. Illness was hidden away. Silence was mistaken for virtue. Eleanor's story was shaped by those customs, by a society that measured worth in visibility and progress, leaving the quiet ones behind. And yet, here she is, not restless, not angry, but present. The house has learned from her. It has become a place that notices small things, that remembers without clinging. Each creak and sigh carries intention now, not as a signal, but as reassurance. On one of her final mornings, the historian climbs the attic stairs for the first time. The door opens easily. Inside, the air is warm and still. Dust floats lazily in the light. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels acknowledged. She does not search the trunks or move the chair. She simply stands, breathing slowly, allowing the room to exist as it is. There is no apparition, no voice, only a deep sense of being permitted to witness. The historian feels gratitude rise unexpectedly, quiet and steady. She leaves the attic exactly as she found it, the door closing without sound behind her. After she goes, the house continues. New tenants arrive. Time moves forward in its careful, uneven way, but something endures, woven gently into the structure, into the tune's unspoken understanding that not all presences are meant to depart. As you rest now, let this continuation soothe you. There is no escalation here, no sudden turn, only depth, widening slowly, like water settling into a familiar shape. Your breathing remains slow, your body heavy and supported. The attic holds its calm. Eleanor remains, not trapped, but rooted, a quiet constant in a world that moves too quickly. And as this part of the story softens at the edges, allow yourself to sink further into rest, knowing the night still has more to reveal. Gently, patiently, when you are ready, the night arrives slowly. The weight prefers to, in this part of the world, lingering at the edges before finally settling in. Lamps flicker on across town, one by one, until the streets glow softly like a string of distant stars. The house receives the darkness without resistance, its walls cooling, its windows reflecting the quiet movements of trees and sky dot inside. The evening unfolds in familiar patterns. A kettle cools on the stove. A book lies open where it was set down. The new tenant, a middle-aged man with a gentle manner and an old habit of staying awake too late, moves through the rooms with careful steps. He has lived here only a few months, yet already the house feels accommodating, as though it has adjusted itself around his presence. He senses the attic without thinking about it, not as something above him, but as something around him, an awareness woven subtly into the space. On his first night in the house, He noticed it and then, instinctively, dismissed it. Years of living alone had taught him that quiet often feels fuller than it truly is. Still, there are moments now when he pauses, listening, and finds that the silence listens back. This particular night is marked by memory. Outside, the town prepares for a small historical observance, an understated gathering meant to honor its earliest settlers. There will be speeches, candlelight, carefully chosen words. Inside the house, another kind of remembrance takes place, unnoticed and unrecorded. As midnight approaches, the attic stirs in its usual way, a gentle settling, a soft shift of weight that belongs neither to wood nor to wind alone. The man, sitting in the dim light of the living room, looks up from his book without surprise. He does not feel watched. He feels accompanied. He closes the book and rests his hands in his lap, breathing slowly. Above him, the attic holds steady. Eleanor's presence gathers not as form, but as attention. She has learned the rhythms of countless nights like this, learned how grief, loneliness, and acceptance sound when they move quietly through a house. Long ago, Eleanor listened in much the same way. She listened to her family below, to footsteps and voices that gradually grew fewer. She listened to the world changing without her. Over time, she learned to listen inward to the small mercies of stillness, to the way memory can be softened by patience. Tonight, those lessons echo gently. The man feels a thought rise unbidden, a memory of his own that he has not touched in years. A voice he once knew, a room that no longer exists. The memory does not hurt. It settles, warm and complete, then drifts away. Upstairs, the attic seems to breathe. The floorboards respond to the house's quiet conversation, the kind that requires no language. This is how memory and mercy meet, not in grand gestures, but in shared stillness. Eleanor does not seek recognition. She offers space. In the early hours, when the man finally rises to go to bed, he pauses at the foot of the stairs. He places a hand on the banister, feeling the smoothness worn into it over generations. He does not speak. He simply nods a gesture of respect he does not consciously understand. The house responds by settling fully into rest. The attic grows still. The night completes its slow arc, carrying everything gently toward morning. As you listen now, allow your own memories to pass just as quietly. There is no need to hold them. Let them drift like shadows at the edge of sleep. Your breathing remains slow, your body supported, your thoughts unburdened. The story continues without urgency, moving deeper into calm where nothing demands and nothing startles. In the attic, there is an object that has never been moved. It rests where it was placed long ago, untouched, not out of fear, but out of quiet agreement. Even those who sensed the presence there felt no urge to disturb it, as though the house itself had drawn a gentle boundary around its place. The object is a small wooden box, no larger than a book, tucked beneath the eaves where the ceiling slopes low. Its surface is smooth, darkened by age, the grain soft by countless seasons of warmth and cold. A simple brass clasp holds it closed. There is no lock. there never was. What it contains has never needed to be hidden. Long ago, Eleanor Hawthorne placed the box there herself. It held fragments of her life that did not fit easily into the world below. Letters she never sent, pressed leaves gathered on slow walks when the town slept, a ribbon from a dress worn once and never again. Each item chosen not for its value, but for its meaning, for the way it marked time passing gently rather than forcefully. As years folded over one another, the box became more than an object. It became an anchor, a place where Eleanor's attention returned again and again. In a life that grew increasingly narrow, it offered a sense of continuity. She could open it, rearrange its contents, and feel the shape of her days without needing to explain them to anyone else. After Eleanor's physical presence faded, the box remained. Dust gathered lightly around it, yet never on it, as though the air itself respected its stillness. Those who stood in the attic sometimes noticed it without fully seeing it, their gaze slipping past, guided gently elsewhere. The house seemed to understand that not everything was meant to be examined. On certain nights, particularly those heavy with memory, the box seems warmer than the air around it, not hot, not glowing, but faintly alive with intention. Eleanor's presence gathers there, not as a figure, but as awareness, touching each memory without reopening old wounds. The man who now lives in the house has never climbed to the attic, and yet, one night, he dreams of the box. In the dream, it sits open in a pool of soft light. He does not look inside. He understands instinctively that the contents are complete, that nothing more needs to be added or removed when he wakes. The dream lingers like a familiar scent. He carries its calm with him through the day, through small tasks and quiet conversations. The attic above remains undisturbed, holding its steady silence. Objects like this are rarely mentioned in official histories. They do not alter events or change outcomes, yet they shape inner landscapes, offering refuge where none is otherwise provided. Eleanor's box is such an object, a testament to a life lived inwardly, with care and attention. As you continue to rest, imagine that box now, safe beneath the eaves, surrounded by stillness. There is nothing urgent about it, nothing unresolved. It simply exists, complete in its purpose. Your breathing remains slow and even. The story does not hurry. It drifts, inviting you to drift with it, deeper into comfort. Asterisk, the town changes in ways that are almost impossible to chart. There are no announcements, no meetings called, no articles written in the local paper to explain it. The change arrives softly, like a shift in weather that people notice only after it has already settled in. It begins with small pauses. People linger a little longer on sidewalks beneath turning leaves, conversations slow, stretching into comfortable silences rather than hurried conclusions. The town clock, long rumored to run a minute fast, is quietly adjusted one morning, and no one can remember who requested it. Time itself seems to ease its grip. The house at the edge of town becomes part of this gentle adjustment. Its presence no longer carries the faint unease it once did. Children walk past it without glancing over their shoulders. Neighbors nod to its windows, as if acknowledging an old resident who prefers to keep to herself. The attic window remains dark, yet something about it feels settled, complete. During the weeks leading up to Halloween, the town holds its usual traditions. Pumpkins appear on porches. Paper lanterns sway in the cool evenings. But there is less noise than there once was, less forced excitement. Instead, there is a feeling of reverence, as though the season is being treated not as spectacle, but as remembrance. On one particularly quiet evening, the town librarian adds a small exhibit near the front desk. It features photographs of homes that no longer stand, families whose names have faded from memory. There is no explanation posted, only a simple title handwritten on a card. Those who stayed. Visitors pause before it, unsure why it feels important, yet reluctant to walk past too quickly. The house listens. It always asks, and now it seems to listen outward as well. Its stillness echoing through the streets in subtle ways. Eleanor's presence, once contained entirely within the attic, feels diffused, woven into the larger rhythm of the place, not spread thin, but shared. The man who lives there now notices these changes without attaching meaning to them. He finds himself sleeping more deeply. His dreams are unremarkable, gentle, and easily forgotten. On mornings when fog settles low over the town, he stands at the kitchen window longer than usual, feeling no urge to rush. Above him, the attic holds its quiet vigil. The wooden box remains untouched. The chair by the window stays, angled toward the light. Eleanor's awareness moves slowly, unhurried, no longer focused inward alone. She senses the town remembering, and in that remembering, releasing something it has carried for generations. Long ago, people like Eleanor were often folded into upper rooms and closed doors. Their stories were softened, simplified, or lost altogether. The town, without realizing it, has begun to correct that omission, not through confession or apology, but through attention, through patience. On Columbus Day, a small gathering forms near the old meeting hall. Candles are lit. Names are read aloud, some familiar, others not. When Eleanor Hawthorne's name is spoken, there is a pause, a shared stillness that passes through the crowd like a held breath. No one reacts outwardly, yet something settles, as if a long sentence has finally reached its end. That night, the attic is very still, not dormant, not empty, but complete. The house settles early, its beams relaxing into the dark. The presence within does not withdraw. It rests. As you listen now, allow this quiet resolution to wash over you. There is no climax here, no final revelation, only balance, restored gently, patiently, over time. Your breathing mirrors the house's rhythm, slow and even. Your body feels supported, grounded. The town sleeps, the house stands, the attic remains, not as a place of lingering sorrow, but as a witness to what happens when attention is finally paid. And as this part of the story softens and fades, let your thoughts slow further, drifting causally toward knowing that the night still holds more quiet understanding ahead. Asterisk. There is a particular kind of night that arrives only a few times each year, when the air is neither warm nor cold, when the sky hangs low and sound seems to travel differently. On such nights, the house at the edge of town becomes especially attentive, its stillness deepening as though preparing to listen more closely than usual. The man wakes shortly after midnight, not startled, not afraid. He simply opens his eyes, aware that something has shifted. The room is dark, yet not empty. Moonlight presses gently against the curtains, outlining the familiar shapes of furniture and floor. Above him, the attic settles with a long, patient sigh, Elie still breathing slowly, allowing the moment to unfold without resistance. This is not the first time he has woken like this. Over the months, he has learned that these awakens carry no urgency. They are invitations to be present, nothing more. From the attic comes a sound so soft, it barely qualifies as sound at all. A rhythmic movement, steady and It is not a footstep, nor the creak of wood under strain. It resembles the gentle rocking of a chair, the kind meant to soothe rather than signal. The man feels his own breathing gradually fall into sync with it. Long ago, Eleanor used the chair in much the same way. When her thoughts grew heavy, when the world below felt too distant, she would rock slowly, allowing the motion to quiet her mind. The attic learned that rhythm, absorbed it, remembered it, and now, on nights like this, it offers that memory outward, sharing it without expectation. The man's thoughts drift to a time before he lived here, before his life had narrowed in ways he never planned. He remembers long evenings filled with conversation, laughter that came, isali, the sense of being known. The memories arrive gently, without the sharpness of regret. They pass through him and then move on, leaving warmth behind. Upstairs, the small wooden box beneath the eaves remains closed, its purpose fulfilled. Eleanor's presence is not focused there tonight. It moves freely, attentive to the house, to the one within it who needs rest more than answers. As the rocking sound fades, the house settles fully. The man's eyelids grow heavy. He does not try to interpret what he has heard. He does not assign it meaning. He allows it to be what it is, a shared moment of calm in the deep hours of the night. Sleep returns season, wrapping around him like a familiar blanket. The house holds steady, its beams relaxed, its attic quiet once more. Eleanor remains, not as a figure, but as a gentle influence, a reminder that comfort can come from unexpected places. As you listen now, allow that same comfort to reach you. Your breathing slows further. Your muscles soften. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to understand. The story asks only that you rest within it. The night continues its slow passage. Outside, clouds drift. Inside, the house dreams dot. And as this part of the story begins to fade, let yourself drift with it, sinking deeper into peaceful sleep, carried by the quiet rhythm of a place that remembers how to soothe. The final night arrives without ceremony. As endings often do, it does not announce itself as different, nor does it ask to be remembered. It simply unfolds, calm and like a page turning softly in a book, already familiar to the hands that hold it. The house settles earlier than usual. Lamps are dimmed. Curtains are drawn. Outside, the town rests beneath a sky washed clean of clouds, the stars distant and steady. Inside, every room seems to exhale at once, releasing the last small tensions of the day. In the attic, there is no movement tonight, no rocking chair, no settling sigh. The stillness is complete, not empty, but fulfilled. Eleanor's presence is not withdrawn. It has simply reached a state where it no longer needs to signal itself to be known. Long ago, Eleanor Hawthorne stayed because there was nowhere else prepared to hold her quiet nature. The world below valued noise, visibility, progress. The attic offered something rarer. It offered permission to remain still, to exist without explanation, to be present without performance. Over time, that choice shaped the house, then the town, then the people who pass through both, not traumatically, not visibly, but deeply, the kind of influence that moves beneath the surface, altering the current without disturbing the water. The man sleeps through the night without waking. His dreams are gentle and indistinct, made of light and open spaces. When morning comes, it arrives softly, pale sunlight reaching the upper windows, touching the attic last, as it always has. Nothing has ended in the way stories often end. The attic remains. The house stands. Eleanor is still there, yet also everywhere. The stillness has spread. She never left the attic because she did not need to. She became part of what learned to listen. And now, as this story loosens its hold, allow yourself to rest even more deeply. Your breathing is slow. Your body is heavy and safe. There is no mystery left to solve, only calm to receive. Some presences fade by departing, others fade by becoming gentle enough to no longer disturb the night. Eleanor's story belongs to the second kind. As the house settles into daylight, the attic remains unchanged, its quiet intact, its purpose complete. And as this final image softens and dims, let your thoughts drift freely, floating toward sleep. If this calm, chilling mystery has brought you comfort, consider subscribing to Midnight Murmurs Radio, where quiet stories, gentle shadows, and peaceful nights continue to unfold. Your support helps these soft-spoken histories find a place to rest